My name is Barbara. I'm 68 years old. I live in a modest two-bedroom house at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that used to be louder, livelier, and full of children. That includes my own son, Mason, who once rode his bicycle up and down this very pavement, chasing imaginary villains and yelling for me to watch. Now the street is silent most days, except for the mail truck and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. I live alone. My husband, Richard, passed away 6 years ago, and since then, silence has become both my sanctuary and my punishment. There are no voices in the kitchen, no footsteps in the hallway, no one waiting for me at the table with a grin and a newspaper. I've grown used to it, but some days, especially Sunday evenings, it still bites. That's when family used to matter. Now it's mostly group texts and emojis. My son visits sometimes. He's married to Amanda, a pleasant enough woman, polite, always smiling just enough to not ask questions. They have a boy, Troy, 17 years old, tall, moody, addicted to his phone like it holds his lungs. I've babysat him since he was born. I changed his diapers, warmed up his bottles, sang lullabies when he was colicky. When he was little, he'd tug at my sleeve and ask for stories about when things were black and white. Now, he barely glances at me unless I'm handing him food. They say teenagers are like that, distant. But it's not just distance. It's like I've become furniture in their lives. Expected, quiet, out of place if I try to say too much. Mason often speaks to me in logistics. What time to arrive, how long to stay, how Troy's doing in school. Amanda will mention new trends or a show they watched, but never about me, never about what I'm reading or what I think. I suppose I've allowed it. I've been trying not to be a burden. I say yes more than I say no. I offer help before they ask. I don't interrupt. Until that day. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished folding laundry and sat down with a bowl of soup, planning to finally watch that historical series everyone talks about, the one with the swords and the betrayals. I had my old Samsung tablet propped up on the counter, subtitles on, or so I thought, but they weren't showing. I tapped and swiped, got stuck on some settings screen, and ended up making the volume disappear entirely. I felt the now familiar wave of irritation at myself. Technology is not my strong suit. I know how to use email, browse recipes, send a few texts, but the rest feels like a second language, one I never quite picked up because I was too busy working, caring, adapting to everyone else's needs. I was visiting Mason's house that afternoon. I bring homemade chicken pot pie every couple weeks, Troy's favorite. Or at least it used to be. They were in the living room, Mason scrolling on his laptop, Amanda doing something with laundry, and Troy, as always, sunk into the couch with his phone 6 inches from his face. I stood awkwardly for a moment, the tablet in my hand. Troy, honey, can you help me for just a second? I can't figure out how to get subtitles back on. He didn't move. His thumbs continued to fly over the screen. I waited. Then, slowly, he looked up. His expression wasn't annoyed exactly, more like amused, like a private joke had just landed on his tongue. He snorted, actually snorted, and then said, "You don't even know how to be a normal grandmother. You should be sitting and knitting instead of watching Netflix." I froze. The room didn't freeze with me. Amanda folded another shirt. Mason looked at his screen. No one said anything. I stood there, still holding my tablet like a student clutching a failed test, and I nodded. Just once. That was all. No sharp retort, no teary eyes, no storming out. Just one quiet nod, the kind that buries itself deeper than a scream ever could, and I realized in that moment that I wasn't on their screen anymore, not even as background noise. I was static, inconvenient, outdated, skippable. I smiled, made some small sound like, "It's okay," and set the tablet down on the counter. Then I went to wash the dishes that hadn't been mine, my own voice ringing quietly in my chest. Maybe I don't know how to be a normal grandmother, but maybe I've been the wrong kind of quiet for too long. That evening, I left their house before dessert. I told Amanda I had forgotten to turn off the oven at home, a lie I barely managed to wrap in a smile. She didn't press. Mason didn't look up from his screen. Troy gave me a quick bye, already half lost in a new video, earbuds in, face glowing blue. When I closed the door behind me, I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the quiet take hold. It wasn't just silence, it was a kind of muffled ache, the kind that fills your chest without warning. I walked slowly to my car, carrying an empty pie tin and a thinner spirit. Back home, I boiled water for tea and sat in the kitchen, not bothering to turn on the lights. The shadows felt more honest than the lamps. I looked at the tablet again, still sitting where I'd left it on the counter. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands like it might tell me something I'd missed. Troy's voice echoed in my head. "You don't even know how to be a normal grandmother." The words didn't sting like a slap. They settled heavier, deeper, like a diagnosis. What was a normal grandmother anyway? One who stayed quiet, baked, kept her hands busy, didn't ask questions? One who lived through years of chaos, heartbreak, sacrifice, and learned to keep those stories to herself? I went to the bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. There, tucked among old scarves and weathered notebooks, was Richard's old journal. I hadn't read it in years. I flipped it open and found his handwriting, neat, firm, deliberate. The world changes too fast, but I don't think we're meant to disappear with it. That was my husband. He believed in adaptation, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant starting over at 60. I ran my fingers across the spine of the book and glanced at the mirror above my dresser. I looked tired, but beneath the lines, the softness, the grays, I saw someone unfinished, someone who had been quiet not out of weakness, but out of habit. Back in the kitchen, I reopened the tablet. Slowly, clumsily, I navigated to the App Store. My hands trembled as I typed each letter. TikTok. I had heard about it, of course, from Amanda in passing, from the news, from the occasional pop-up ad. I had always assumed it was a place for dances and pranks and youth. But that night, I wasn't looking to dance. I wasn't even looking to be seen. I just wanted to speak, somewhere, even if no one answered. The account was easy enough to make. I picked a name that meant nothing. Tea and Quiet 68. I didn't use my real photo, just a picture of my chipped teacup beside the window, steam curling like a question mark into the air. I didn't know what to say in a video, so I typed a caption and added a photo. When your grandson says you're exhausted, but you've survived 5 wars, emotional and literal. I added soft music, some classical piano loop the app suggested. Then I hit post. 47 views in the first hour. 2 hearts, 1 comment. You tell him, Grandma. It was nothing, but it was also something, a flicker, a signal. The next morning, I tried again. This time, I recorded my voice. I sat in my bathrobe and simply spoke about the day Richard proposed. In a diner, with a coffee ring on the napkin and a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. I kept it under a minute. I didn't mention my name, just, once a man proposed to me with no ring and a stutter, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. That video got 147 views, then 304, then 2002. By the end of the day, there were comments, dozens of them, strangers writing. This made me cry, and my grandma never told stories like this. I wish she had. Some asked for more, and that night, when I sat down in bed and stared at the dark ceiling above me, I felt not better, but alive. And I whispered, like a vow I hadn't made in decades, I'm still here, and I still have something to say. By the end of that week, my nighttime ritual had changed. No more half watched cooking shows or crossword puzzles in bed. Instead, I would brew chamomile tea, place the tablet on my dresser, and sit across from it like it was someone who finally wanted to listen. I recorded quietly, with the windows closed, afraid of being heard by no one and everyone at once. Each video became a kind of conversation with ghosts, with Richard, with the younger version of myself, with the people I used to be surrounded by. I didn't rehearse. I didn't write anything down. I just remembered aloud. The third video I posted was about the time I got lost in Italy in 1982. I was wearing a yellow skirt, carrying a map I couldn't read, and asking directions in broken Italian. A street vendor had given me a ride back to my hotel on the back of his Vespa, and I remembered thinking, so this is what being seen feels like. That one hit 10,000 views. Then came the story of the night I labored for 18 hours with Mason, and Richard fell asleep in the waiting room with a bouquet of plastic flowers clutched to his chest. Another story, another wave. People began to follow. Some called me Story Grandma. Others just wrote things like, You remind me of my mother, only she never spoke like this. A young woman messaged me one evening. She wrote, I play your videos when I miss my grandmother. She passed in March. You make the room feel full again. I wept for 10 minutes in the dark, holding the tablet like a warm stone. By mid-month, I had over 40,000 followers, and I hadn't told a soul in my real life. I didn't tell Mason because I already knew the question he would ask. Why are you doing this? I didn't tell Amanda because she would probably just blink and say, Is it safe? And I certainly didn't tell Troy. This wasn't about them. This was about reclaiming the parts of me that didn't belong in their living room, the parts I had flattened over years of being useful, predictable, quiet. Then, one Sunday afternoon, it happened. I was at their house again. Another casserole, another quiet exchange, another moment where I hovered in the kitchen doorway like a ghost who hadn't figured out how to haunt. Troy was in the living room, half laughing at something on his phone. He looked up when I walked by and said, Have you seen this old lady on TikTok? She talks about her husband like it was a war mission. And then he played it. My voice, my story, my memory. It was the Italy video. He didn't know it was me. He watched it with admiration, real admiration, shaking his head and grinning. She's hilarious, he said, but kind of badass too. Like, she really lived, you know? I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Amanda looked up. Mason was passing by with a tray of glasses. No one noticed that the woman in the video was standing 5 feet away. I smiled gently. That sounds wise, I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. Troy nodded. Yeah, she's cool. I wish you knew people like that, Grandma. You'd like her. I turned back toward the kitchen and leaned on the counter for a long time, my hands trembling. He didn't know. He had no idea. And yet, for the first time in years, he had listened to me. Not the version of me handing out pot pie, not the version who asked too many questions about his day. He had heard the person I used to be, the person I still was, and found her worthy. That night when I got home, I uploaded a new video. No caption this time. Just me, staring out the window, voice soft. It's strange when your own family doesn't recognize your voice until it's wearing someone else's name. It reached 60,000 views in 3 days, and one comment, buried in a sea of praise, made my breath catch. You look like my friend's grandmother, Barbara, right? He has pictures with you. I closed the app. I turned off the tablet. I sat in the dark, holding my hands together in my lap, like they might unravel if I let them go. The room was too quiet to stay in, but I didn't move. The world had heard me, but the house stayed silent. I didn't open TikTok the next day, or the one after that. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready for the mirror. There's a strange kind of exposure that comes not from being seen, but from being recognized. When strangers admired my voice, my stories, my humor, it was thrilling and distant, like singing behind a curtain. But when someone connected the voice to me, when they peeled back the anonymity, suddenly it wasn't performance anymore. It was confession. That comment kept ringing in my head. Barbara, right? He has pictures with you. I thought of Troy's phone, of the hundreds of photos Amanda posted every Christmas and birthday. A life well documented, except for the parts I hadn't chosen to share. Until now. 3 days after I closed the app, my son called. Mom, can we talk? His voice was too steady. I could hear the rehearsed calm, the kind people use before delivering something important or uncomfortable. Of course, I said, already knowing. My hands went to smooth my sweater, as if a buttoned front could hold me together. He came by that evening. Amanda didn't come. Troy didn't either. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd scrubbed for decades, the same one where he once learned to count coins and write thank you cards. But now he sat with his back too straight and his mouth too soft. I saw the videos, he began. Or rather, Amanda did. A friend sent her one. She recognized the teacup. I didn't answer. I reached for the kettle instead. You never told us. No, I said. I didn't. Why? I poured the water, watched the steam curl up like breath I hadn't taken in years. Because you never asked. That made him pause, not angrily, just long enough for something to shift in his shoulders. He looked down at his hands. They looked like Richard's, broader now, work worn, hands that once used to hold mine crossing the street. Mom, he said finally, why, why did you say those things about not being seen, about being background? I looked at him, not unkindly. Because they were true, and because I needed to say them before I forgot how. He nodded, slowly, absorbing. And the stories? Were they all real? All of them. I didn't know you got lost in Italy. You never asked. He blinked again, rubbed his jaw. I guess I haven't asked about a lot of things. I said nothing. It was not the time to comfort. I'm sorry, he said after a moment. It's not that we don't care. It's just everything's always moving, fast. I smiled, gently. Yes, and sometimes, when you move fast, you miss the people standing still. He nodded again, then looked down at the table. So, what now? I thought about that, the views, the followers, the little flame that had sparked something I hadn't known I'd needed. I deleted the account, I said. He looked up, surprised. Why? Not out of guilt or shame. I just needed a pause. He was quiet. Did you save them? I reached into the drawer and pulled out a small USB stick, pale blue and barely heavier than a button. They're all here. He took it, holding it carefully like a fragile thing. I'd like to watch them, he said. You can, I said, but not now, not like this. He nodded. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he stood, kissed my forehead, gently, like when he was little, and left. And when the door closed behind him, I sat alone again. But this time, the silence was not empty. It was deliberate, full, like a pause at the end of a sentence, waiting for what comes next. For the first time in weeks, I stopped measuring time by likes, views, or comment notifications. The tablet stayed closed on my desk, its black screen reflecting the lamp and the edges of my quiet room. I returned to my old routines, not because I wanted to, but because I needed the rhythm. There was something grounding in sweeping the kitchen, folding the laundry, organizing drawers that hadn't been touched in years. These were not acts of surrender. They were acts of anchoring. But the world had shifted, even if my steps hadn't. I found myself thinking differently, not about what story to share, but which moments were still mine. Which memories I wanted to protect from applause. Some stories were better left unposted. Some were meant to be carried in silence or told slowly across cups of tea and unhurried afternoons. One week after Mason's visit, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a photograph. It was me holding baby Troy. I was wearing my gardening apron and no makeup, smiling at the infant swaddled in blue. Someone had captured it, probably Amanda, and printed it on thick, matte paper. On the back, scribbled in faint pencil, "You were already enough." I didn't need to guess who sent it. I placed it in a frame and set it on the shelf above the kitchen sink, right beside the ceramic owl Richard bought me in 1979. Every time I rinsed dishes, I saw us both, then and now, suspended in time. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. Troy. He was holding a book, a worn hardcover with frayed edges. It was a copy of The Grapes of Wrath, Richard's favorite novel. I had mentioned it in one of my early videos. He must have remembered. "Did Granddad really like this?" he asked, holding it out. I nodded. He reread it every year, said it reminded him to stay soft, even when the world got hard. Troy shifted his weight, looked down at his shoes, then back up. "Would you read it with me? Like, together?" I blinked. A small, unspoken breath passed between us. "I'd like that," I said. He stepped inside, didn't go straight to the couch like usual. Instead, he followed me to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair across from mine. I poured tea for both of us. He didn't ask for soda. We didn't read that day. Instead, we talked about the book, about Richard, about the garden I used to keep before my knees started aching. Troy listened. He really listened. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "I watched some of the videos," he said. "Dad showed me." I waited. "They were good. I didn't know you were so, I don't know, cool." I smiled, tilting my head. "I didn't either." He laughed. "I mean, you still need help with the remote. But yeah, cool." I laughed with him, the sound rich and easy. He dug his hands into his hoodie pocket, looked awkward for a second, then said, "Can I help you set up subtitles sometime?" I nodded. "That would be lovely." He left without hugging me. He's 17 after all. But the silence he left behind wasn't hollow. It hummed with something warmer. That night, I didn't reach for the tablet. I reached for the USB stick. I plugged it into my laptop and scrolled through the thumbnails. I didn't play them. I just watched their stillness, each frozen frame a story, a confession, a piece of myself I had sent into the world, not to be adored, but to be understood. And I whispered, not to the screen, but to the room, "I'm not just a voice anymore. I'm an echo." And someone finally heard. Spring came slowly. The frost on my bedroom window gave way to dew, and the bare trees out front began to shimmer with hints of green. I started opening the curtains earlier each day, letting the light reach corners I'd let sit in shadow too long. My body still ached in the mornings, knees, lower back, wrists, but there was a certain sweetness in the ache now, like a body waking back into itself. I hadn't uploaded anything in weeks. Not a video, not a voice recording. But I hadn't deleted the app again either. It sat quietly on the tablet, dormant but not dead, like a page left open in a book I wasn't finished reading. Then, one Thursday morning, I received a letter. Real paper, a cream-colored envelope with handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a printed screenshot, a still from one of my early videos. the one about Richard proposing with no ring and too much trembling. The caption was underlined in red. I said yes before he finished the sentence. And beneath it, written in a young looping script, my fiancé stutters. He was afraid to propose. Then I showed him this. He cried, and I said yes before he even asked. There was no signature, just initials, KS. I held the letter for a long time, the paper soft between my fingers. Then I pressed it into my chest and closed my eyes. Not for validation, but for connection. That afternoon, I brewed tea and brought the tablet out of its drawer. I wiped the screen clean with the edge of my sleeve and set it upright on the table. The app opened without hesitation, as if it had been waiting, patient and quiet. I tapped record. No filters, no music, just my face, older now than yesterday, eyes clear. I didn't come back for the numbers, I said softly, or the comments, or the kindness, though I am so grateful for it. I came back because stories deserve space, and because sometimes the people who need to hear us aren't the ones sitting at our tables. They're out there, hoping someone like them exists. So, here I am. I paused, then smiled. Still learning the remote, but not the voice. I posted it and went on with my day. That night, Troy came by again. He was taller, or maybe just standing straighter. He held something behind his back. Don't laugh, he said. I raised an eyebrow. He revealed a new tablet, sleek, lightweight, still in its box. It's yours, he said. The old one's like ancient, and this one has a better mic. I figured if you ever wanted to keep talking. I reached for the box slowly, hands brushing his. I thought you said I wasn't a normal grandmother, I teased, the corner of my mouth lifting. He flushed. Yeah, I was an idiot. We sat together in the living room. He helped me set it up, adjusted the brightness, showed me how to trim videos better. You've got a lot to say, he said, not looking up. You shouldn't stop. I watched him, my grandson, a boy who had once been too loud, then too distant, and now just present. I'm not saying it for me anymore, I said, but maybe for someone who needs to feel less alone. He nodded. That's kind of the point, right? We were quiet after that, not awkwardly, just comfortably. When he left, I sat with the new device on my lap. The screen glowed gently in the dim room. A clean slate, a new chapter. I thought about the women who had written to me, the granddaughters who had cried, the sons who had played my words for their aging mothers, the strangers who had seen me before the people at my own dinner table did. And for once, that didn't hurt because now they saw me too, and not as a helper or a placeholder or a side character, but as someone with a beginning, middle, and story still unfolding. I tapped record and began again. A year passed. The world changed, of course. It always does. Children grew taller, prices climbed, new trends came and vanished like smoke. But in my house, something more subtle had shifted, a new rhythm, a recalibration of roles. I was no longer just a visitor in the lives of my family. I had become a presence again, not loud, not central, but unmistakably there. Troy still rolled his eyes when I asked basic tech questions, but now he answered them, not with impatience, but with the half smile of someone who'd seen both versions of me and chose to stay. Amanda, once gently distant, now lingered in conversations longer. One afternoon, she even asked if I'd help her record her own mother's stories. You made me realize I don't know enough, she said quietly, folding napkins at my table. Mason still didn't say much, but when he hugged me at his birthday, he held on a moment longer than expected. And when I commented on one of his work posts with a simple, proud of you, he replied, that means more than you know. I kept making videos, not daily, not even weekly, but steadily, like planting seeds. Some stories were light, mishaps with cooking, funny memories from my teaching days. Others were heavier. The miscarriage I never told anyone about, the day Richard lost his job, the first time I truly felt invisible. I didn't post for popularity. I posted for release, for the quiet ones who had forgotten how to speak. And I listened too. My comments were filled with other voices now, women in their 60s and 70s, men who had lost partners, grandchildren regretting silence. We stitched our stories together in a digital quilt of resilience. Then, on my 69th birthday, Troy arrived with a wrapped box under his arm. Not small, not large, long and flat. I opened it on the porch while birds chirped nearby and the sky turned the color of ripe peaches. Inside was a tablet. Not new, mine, my original one. He'd taken it months ago, I realized. It was restored, cleaned, and inside it was a single video file titled The Grandma Diaries Season 1. I stared at the screen. It's everything, he said. In order. I edited them, took out the stumbles, kept the silences. I looked at him. He wasn't the same boy who'd once told me I didn't know how to be a normal grandmother. He was taller in posture, gentler in presence. There's a part at the end, he added, with music. Just soft piano, like how you used to have it. And I left a note at the end, but you don't have to read it. It's just, I'll read it, I said. Later that night, alone again, I played the file. It ran for nearly an hour. My voice, my stories, my breath between phrases, my face shifting between joy and grief and wonder. And then, at the end, a text overlay appeared. For the woman who taught me what it really means to speak and what it means to listen. Thank you for not being the kind of grandmother I thought I wanted. You were so much more. I didn't cry, not like before. I sat back, folded my hands over my lap, and closed my eyes. I had become the voice, but more importantly, I had become heard. And as the final piano note faded, I whispered, not to the room, not to the screen, but to something wider, softer, enduring. Not for you, not anymore, but because someone, somewhere, needed it. And in that, I was complete. Months passed after that final video, yet I never truly said goodbye to the voice I found. I simply allowed it to evolve. The account was still there, quiet but alive. I hadn't uploaded anything since the Grandma Diaries Season 1, but the messages kept coming. Not floods anymore, more like steady drops of rain. Thoughtful, tender, intimate. I played your stories for my mother in hospice. She smiled. My daughter asks for the teacup lady before bedtime. Thank you for telling the truth. It helped me tell mine. I didn't always respond. I didn't always know how. But I read every word, each one stitching something inside me that I hadn't realized was still torn. I joined a small group at the library, women my age and older, each of us tasked with recording memoir excerpts once a week. Most had never written anything beyond postcards. We read them aloud in a circle with chipped mugs of coffee and stifled laughter. There was power in that too, not filmed, not edited, just shared. Sometimes Troy picked me up and drove me there. He never stayed for the group. But once when I came out, I found him still in the car, earbuds in, laughing. You told the story about the raccoon in your kitchen again, he said. I could hear it through the wall. I did, I smiled. They requested it. He didn't roll his eyes anymore when I repeated things. He just looked. He saw. For my 70th birthday, I told everyone I wanted a quiet day. No cake, no surprise party, no decorations, just breakfast together, something simple, and time in the garden. Amanda brought muffins, Mason brewed the coffee. Troy handed me a wrapped envelope. Inside, a plane ticket. Paris? I blinked. He grinned. You always said you never made it there with Grandpa. I figured maybe it's not too late to go. Alone? I asked. Unless you'd rather take someone. He shrugged. But I booked it for just you. In my chest, a thud of something like fear, but sweeter. That old instinct to say no, to stay where it's safe, to smile and decline. But this time, I didn't reach for the comfortable reply. Instead, I looked up. Then I guess I'll have to record something new. The plane window framed the world in miniature. Fields, rivers, cities stitched together like the quilts my mother used to make. I held my tablet loosely in my lap, a blank draft open, no script. When I landed, I walked the cobbled streets alone. I stopped at a cafe near the Seine, ordered coffee in awkward French, laughed with the waiter. Then I sat on a bench in a park and pressed record. This one, I whispered to the lens, isn't about the past. It's about still being in it. The video showed no face, just trees overhead, wind brushing leaves, a corner of my scarf, and the distant sound of water. But my voice, steady, clear, filled the frame. Somewhere across the ocean, a grandson would hear it and know. And somewhere even further, a stranger might too. And that was enough because the voice, once dismissed, once quieted, had outgrown the room. It had become a bridge, and I had become more than a grandmother again. I had become a story that didn't end. The postcard arrived in mid-autumn, months after Paris, tucked between a bank statement and an ad for roofing. Its edges were bent, the ink smudged from weather or clumsy hands. It was from a woman named Ruth, someone I'd never met in person, but who had watched every video, commented on dozens, and once sent me a hand-knit coaster in the mail with a note. So your tea doesn't feel alone. This card was simpler, a picture of her garden, marigolds, dry now but proud. On the back, still listening, always. I placed the card on my desk beside the framed photo of Troy as a toddler and the ceramic owl that never moved. Then I sat down and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I hadn't handwritten anything longer than a shopping list in years, but that day I wrote a letter, not to Ruth, not to Troy, not even to Mason. I wrote it to myself, to the version of me who stood in that kitchen, holding a tablet and hearing, "You don't even know how to be a normal grandmother." To the woman who smiled, nodded, and did the dishes like her grief wasn't boiling under her skin. I wrote, "You were never broken, just buried. You were never behind, only paused. You kept love in jars and silence in drawers, and no one thought to ask what it cost you to stay useful. But you knew, and when you remembered how to speak, the world didn't laugh. It leaned in." The letter was 5 pages long by the end, full of things I had never said aloud, regrets that had softened with time, triumphs no one had clapped for, moments of ordinary beauty, late-night toast, soft sweaters, the smell of new books, the creak of floorboards that reminded me I was still alive. When I finished, I folded it once, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. Then I walked to the fireplace, opened the small iron gate, and placed the envelope inside. I didn't burn it. I didn't need to. I just let it sit there, unread by anyone else, but no longer unspoken. That night, Troy called. Not a text, a call. "Hey," he said, "I was thinking, would you ever want to come speak at my school?" I laughed. Why on earth would they want me? He hesitated. "We're doing a project on oral histories, real stories, not facts from a book. I showed the class one of your clips, the one about the dress you sewed in high school. They loved it." I smiled. "You want me to come in and tell them about a homemade hemline?" He laughed. "Well, and maybe about how you started telling your story, why you waited, why you didn't anymore." That paused me, but I didn't say no. A week later, I stood in front of 25 17-year-olds. No script, just a scarf around my neck and a thermos of tea. And I told the truth about silence, about family, about becoming seen by strangers before being seen at home, and about how none of it was revenge. It was revelation. When I finished, the room was quiet, not bored, reverent, a kind of listening that felt sacred. A girl with dyed purple hair raised her hand. Were you scared? Terrified, I said, and then free. They clapped, not loudly, just enough. Troy drove me home that afternoon. Didn't say much until we pulled up in front of my house. You were really good, he said. I wasn't performing, I replied. I know, that's why it worked. He didn't come in, just waved, pulled away. But when I entered the house, it felt different again. Not bigger, not warmer, just ready. Ready for the next voice, the next silence, the next beginning, and I knew, with the steadiness of someone who has rewritten her own ending, I might have started late, but I had arrived right on time. The last fall I remember as just mine was in 1983. Mason was 8, and I had just returned to part-time teaching after years of staying home. Richard was still alive, and we had rented a cabin for a weekend upstate. The trees were wild with color. Golds and reds and browns that looked like a painter had shaken the brush in a tantrum. I remember waking up early before the boys and stepping onto the porch with a shawl and a cup of instant coffee, feeling like I had stolen a moment no one would ever know about. A moment that whispered, "You still exist." 40 years later, I was ready to claim that season again, not as a stolen thing, but as a chosen one. By October, the quiet had changed. It no longer felt like an absence. It was a space I could move in. I had stopped filling my days to the brim. I let moments pass without trying to make them useful. I began saying no more easily and yes more slowly. I still made videos, though less often. Each one carried more intention. Some were no longer stories, but questions. When was the last time you felt truly seen? What would you say to the person you used to be? Those videos invited replies. They came from hospital beds, long night shifts, quiet porches. Women sent poems. Men shared memories. One girl sent a clip of her mother, my voice playing from her phone as the woman peeled apples in silence, nodding along. I didn't go viral anymore. I went deeper. The library group had grown too. We were 8 now, 5 women, 3 men. One Tuesday, the librarian offered us the small auditorium downstairs. Just a reading, she said, for the community. We called it Echoes. There were no microphones, no stage lighting, just folding chairs and paper cups of cider. We each stood and read something we'd written. Some people cried. Others closed their eyes and smiled. Afterward, a woman my age touched my arm and said, "I always thought no one wanted to hear us anymore." I said, "We stopped offering them the chance." That night I walked home with a notebook under my arm. It was half full. The pages weren't neat, dog-eared, tea-stained, marked with arrows and corrections, but it was mine. Troy had started calling me weekly, not out of obligation. I could tell. He would call while walking somewhere, sometimes while waiting for a train. Once, he said, "I think I get it now. The silence thing. It's not about no one talking. It's about no one asking." Another time, "I used to think I was too young to understand you. Maybe I was just too distracted." I never made him explain. I didn't need to. He was learning the language of noticing. On Thanksgiving, I declined the invitation. Amanda was confused. "You're not coming?" "I'd like to do something else this year." I didn't owe more explanation, but I gave it gently. I need to know I can be happy even when I'm not filling a role. I went to a small bed and breakfast by the coast, just for 2 nights. I took my notebook, a new pen, and a scarf Troy had gifted me. The owners were kind. The other guests kept to themselves. On the second morning, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the waves. I recorded a video, the wind cutting gently through my words. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Today, I am one, not the other. I posted it without editing. It reached 30,000 people, not because of anything I did, but because it told the truth. December arrived with its usual sharpness. The cold was less cruel than it had been in years past. Maybe it was the wool coat I finally splurged on. Maybe it was something else, a kind of inner weather shift. I was no longer waiting to be needed. I was no longer bracing for dismissal. One morning, I pulled out the USB stick where I'd saved my first videos. I watched them in silence. Not to judge, not to edit, just to remember. The woman in those videos was uncertain, but brave. She had no idea what was coming. The connection, the recognition, the reconnection. She just knew something inside her was finished waiting. I whispered to the screen, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And I meant it. A week before Christmas, I received an invitation. It wasn't from my family. It was from a college, small, liberal arts, 2 towns over. A professor in the media department had found my videos through her mother. She asked if I would speak to her senior seminar on narrative identity and social platforms. Most of them are creating content every day, she wrote, but none of them know what it means to speak from silence. I said yes. The day of the lecture, I wore a sweater Mason had gifted me last year. I brought no notes. I didn't stand at the podium. I sat on the edge of the desk and told the story of a boy, a sentence, a silence, a voice, a screen, and a return. I didn't embellish. I didn't perform. At the end, one student raised his hand. "Would you do it all again?" he asked. "Start the TikTok, I mean, knowing what you know now?" I paused. "I wouldn't start the same way," I said. "But yes, I would begin." "Why?" "Because waiting to be asked is its own kind of disappearance, and I was tired of vanishing politely." The room held still. On Christmas Day, my doorbell rang at 8 a.m. I opened the door in my robe, hair a mess. It was Troy. He held a tray, 2 paper cups of coffee, and a brown paper bag. "Mom's making everyone wait until noon. I thought maybe we could do breakfast." I stepped aside. We sat at the table with croissants and black coffee. He didn't touch his phone. He looked around at my house, the photos, the books, the new plant he'd given me in August. "This place feels like you," he said. "It always has," I said. "You just didn't see it before." He nodded. "I was looking for something else. I think I thought being a grandmother meant you had to be like a fixture, safe, predictable. I'm not a fireplace or a rocking chair." I smiled. You're a lighthouse." That caught me. I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You shine," he said, "even when we forget to look." We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. When he left, I walked to the window and watched him go. Then I returned to the kitchen, poured another cup, and wrote in my notebook, "The season I chose myself began without ceremony. No spotlight, just a sentence spoken aloud when no one was listening. But the echo changed everything. That entry would be the final page of the notebook, but not of the story. Because stories like mine don't end. They just stop needing permission." And on that December morning, in a quiet house with warm light and open curtains, I knew this with certainty. I had not just found my voice. I had built a home for it, and finally it belonged to me.